I'm your brother, Minister Wasim Muhammad, and welcome to the Wasim Muhammad TV show. And I am honored and grateful that I have the opportunity to bring to you the lively art of conversation as it relates to the city of Camden, the Camden County, and the Delaware Valley when it comes to political talk, community talk, education, and so many wonderful things we're going to begin to talk about during these episodes. And I welcome you and I am grateful. And but today, we have in the studio with us a wonderful guest, and it would be very befitting to have him as my first guest. And I'm very excited because I was his first guest when he came into the city of Camden at a press conference a little over a year ago.
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half ago. And I'm joined and welcomed in the studio by our superintendent, Mr. Paymon Rouhanifard. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you. Well, it's great to have you. Well, anybody that knows me know that I'm a historian, history buff. I like to study the, history of people, and because we were taught that, before you read a book, try to get into the writer to find out the motives and what make the person write about what they write about, and talk about some of the things they talk about. So as always, I thought it was intriguing when I first met you. You went into your history about how you got here to America, and I think it's something that's wonderful that we need to share with this audience that's listening, because many times they hear you, at the press conference or dealing with something, all the striking things that you do for our city and for the educational system here in Camden. But let's begin by talking about a little bit about Mr. Paymon Rouhanifard.
Sure. Yes, yeah. So I think you know that I was born in Iran, and my dad was raised in southern Iran in a very rural village, and my mom was raised in northern Iran in a fairly kind of working class, larger city. And we then, my family moved to a town called Shiraz, which is an older city in the northwest, and that's where I was born. And to make a long story short, I was raised in a small religious minority group in Iran. And at the time of the Iranian Revolution, that group became fairly systematically persecuted, and we had to flee the country.
I believe it was the Baha'i faith, correct?
The Baha'i faith, yes,
correct.
that's
yes,
what it's called.
Okay.
And so basically one day, my dad, who worked at a dairy company as a mechanical engineer, and it was then taken over by the government, and he was on a do not hire list, and they effectively fired him, and there was a warrant out for his arrest, and they froze all of our assets, and they came and knocked on our door and effectively asked us to recant our faith. Mm-hmm. And my dad refused to do that. Very religious, principled man. Mm-hmm. And a few weeks later, we basically had to leave the country because he probably would have been arrested. We had some family members who were arrested, some who were executed, many who were just tortured for a long period of time. So it was, as you can imagine, a fairly tumultuous time for our family. Yes. I was young and for the most part blissfully unaware of what was happening. My parents did a really nice job of shielding my little brother and I. We're 1 year apart, so I was about 4 when this happened. He was 3. And we escaped the country into a refugee camp in Pakistan, and we lived there for about a year.
Okay.
And then we moved to Vienna, Austria, and lived there for about a year. And we went there because we had heard that that was at the time an easy place or a place to go get a visa.
Correct, yes.
And we then wound up in the United States. We lived in Philly for a brief stint, about 9 months. Here I am back in the area. And because my grandparents had actually moved to Philly 2 years before us. They left when the writing was on the wall, right after the revolution, and my parents waited it out a little bit. So that's why they got here before us. And my parents hated the weather up here. Go figure. It's 22 degrees outside right now.
Correct.
But, and so we ended up in the South. And my dad followed his brother, who had also left around the time, right before the revolution. And he had come to the United States to study for university. So we followed him down to a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where I grew up.
Oh, that's wonderful. And as we go on and build up to, your college career, your high school career, and growing up in Iran, how much of that do you think, that even though you said you were very young when they were going through the revolution in Iran, how much that you think, and your parents in parenting you with their parenting skill, how much you think of that experience that you carry with you today? What did you get from it as an adult today from that experience? Because we know experiences that we have is what molds and makes us as an adult.
My parents didn't really talk a lot about that story. My brother and I really got them to share it with us, and we were both kind of obsessed with it as far as like our history, and we just wanted to learn so much about it. And you can understand some parts of that story they didn't want to share because they didn't want to revisit a lot of the harder times. And my mom particularly had a really hard time with it, but it is a huge part of who I am. And I remember having just very lengthy conversations with them and asking them all these questions about our relatives and what happened to them, where they are now, and how that experience has affected them. I'd say my biggest takeaway from my parents is that they told us if it weren't for their education, they wouldn't have been able to persevere through those challenges. Because a long period of time where neither of them had a job, long period of time in the United States where they were basically one job to the next as far as working bare bones, paycheck to paycheck. And so it was a really hard time for us. For my dad, who was a mechanical engineer, my mom's a chemist, she has a PhD in chemistry, and just barely making ends meet. But it was their education, again, that allowed them to persevere. And that's what I took with me to high school, to college. And I had that social justice bend. And I wanted to be that same force for other kids that my parents were for me.
Now, this was in Tennessee, for those who don't know, you know.
Yeah.
This was in Tennessee. What town was that?
So I grew up in, well, I shouldn't say I grew up. We moved to a town called Franklin. And so we bounced around a few small towns about 45 minutes south of Nashville. I went to high school in Nashville, which is now a bigger city today.
Vols territory.
Vols territory, yeah. And then I wound up in college at the University of North Carolina.
Yes.
So I'm a Tar Heel.
Well, let's stay there. And, you know, having a background, as you know, as many know, I'm a Turner's Burners, as we call it here, with Coach Clarence, the legendary Coach Clarence Turner, of those great years of high school basketball that Camden experienced. So, you know, basketball was very, very big and still is big in the city of Camden, as you see the young men this year having a great season and, you know, doing some great things.
Absolutely.
But you talked about being a Tar Heel. That is prestigious. I mean, going to a school such as like that. And people don't know that really North Carolina is really known for its academics as well. But it's just overshadowed by such an athletic, you know, the legend. Recently we just lost the legendary coach there, Coach Dean Smith. And talk about some of that experiences there in college for those who are inspiring to go to college. Do you think that you can tie in with the young people here in Camden with some of the experiences you shared at North Carolina?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that growing up in Tennessee and the presence of college sports actually really helped me acclimate to the country. Because my parents weren't really into sports, and you know, it was a little bit hard time for my little brother and I to get adjusted. And everywhere on our block, they had Tennessee football flags and Tennessee everything else. And that's when I first became interested in sports, and it really, again, helped me adjust to the culture. And when I got to high school, I thought I wanted to go really, really far away. Ultimately wound up at North Carolina, which about a 10-hour drive from Nashville, but I was looking at schools on the West Coast as well. I'm glad I wound up in North Carolina because it's a wonderful place, like you said, and it has a lot of history. It's the oldest public university in the country. And it was an amazing experience. Sports is a big part of the university. It's certainly more known for its academics. And I was really fortunate to have had really great, motivated friends, some of whom were athletes. I was definitely not an athlete. But I kind of took my passion for sports with me there as a student. I still remain a pretty avid Tennessee Vols fan and North Carolina Tar Heel fan.
And yes, and I was surprised the fact that that you knew some of the history of Coach Dean Smith, of his integration of basketball. And I don't want to tell people, I didn't get an opportunity to tell you that. You knew that already. If you would like to share that with the audience, you know, about Dean Smith being the, you know, when it came to, you know, the segregated years in America.
Yeah, in college I started to really study up on Dean Smith. So Coach Smith retired the year before I enrolled at University of North Carolina. And so Bill Guthridge took over for him, and I just remember hearing the stories, and I became fascinated by him, and I picked up all of his books. I think he's written 3 books. And it's almost a little known fact, at least certainly then it wasn't as well known as it is today, as we've been eulogizing him. So even the way he was raised, his father integrated the first high school basketball team in the 1930s in Kansas. And then in the 50s, when Coach Smith was just an assistant coach, and he didn't have a big name back then, obviously, as an assistant coach, he went in with one of his players to a restaurant in Chapel Hill, and was the first restaurant to be integrated. So he did a sit-in with that student. And you know, it's kind of a remarkable story. And many, many years later, he shared, I shouldn't say he shared, a reporter shared an exchange he had with Coach Smith saying, "It's amazing that you did that. I want to give you credit for it. I want to tell the whole story in vivid detail if you give me the opportunity. And Coach Smith basically disallowed him the opportunity because he had this famous line that went something to the effect of, you should never be proud of doing the right thing. You should just do the right thing. And that's how he always carried himself. And I had a chance to meet him just one time at a book signing. So I don't know the man, but I've learned a lot about him. And he's an amazing figure.
Yes, I think that's very, very exciting. And let's take a switch a little bit. We're going to go back and forth. I want to talk a little bit about education. And as everybody know, that you probably have one of the toughest jobs as any administrator in the city of Camden, because as we see some of the changes that happen with, with Mayor Red, with public safety, and the county with public safety, and some of the other changes that we see happening in Camden, you probably have the, one of the most challenging, turnarounds, because these results that, and I want to say this to the audience, some of these results you're not going to see overnight, but we do see progress. And one thing that I know that, draws my attention about you is that your passion for education, being a former educator myself.
Well, thank you for saying that. And the job is certainly challenging in many respects, but it's also an incredibly exciting opportunity for all of us to be able to work together and serve our students and families, because they deserve the highest quality education possible. And so the work is really, really complicated, and happy to discuss kind of any facet you want to jump into. But it begins with our strategic plan, and we, as you know, develop that plan by listening and learning and assessing. And I'll tell you that we're not going to agree on every last issue as far as the community-wide conversation goes, but what I found really compelling and what I'm really grateful is that people have an open mind, and people are engaging, and people are talking to us, and we're all aligned on the end goal. And that's what matters the most, and that's to ensure that all of our kids have access to a great education, and their life trajectory is fundamentally positively impacted by what we're doing. Because right now, it is completely unfair and unjust that if you're born in Camden, you have steeper life odds than if you're born in other parts of South Jersey and other parts of the state and country. And we've got to change that.
Correct.
And that's why this work is so critical, and why we have such a sense of urgency.
Well, I know, and being on the advisory board, that I've seen you, even after the board meetings, that you would stay and talk to some of the parents, some of the students, and give your time after they, are, sometimes not so nice with you, but still, no, you still persevere, and it's very intriguing to many of us who may not have the temperament that you have, but to see that, as they say, educators always educating, even when they sleep, so we pay attention to that. But, and I think it's great that you did first your listening tour. And you want to talk a little bit about that, how that went, because sometimes people see the end of what you talked about, your strategic plan, but I think we need to go back and talk about how, and it speaks to you once again in your leadership, that you went around and listened to people in the community and had community meetings and talked to some of the teachers. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that great leaders listen, and I model my leadership style off of many others who I've come to study or work directly with. And speaking of Dean Smith, by the way, I mean, he was a listener, he was humble, and so those are the types of characteristics that I was mindful of when I was first appointed here. And on top of that, what I don't know, what our team doesn't know, we don't know. So we want to first lead by just listening and being humble, and but also just ensuring that we have all the facts, and that we can build upon the issues that are coming to our attention and build upon the things that are actually working well. And it was a really great learning experience to go from one school to the next, to go from one town hall to the next, and better understand what specific complications our parents are pointing out, what specific things are actually going quite well. And safety jumped out as the #1 issue, and that's the first promise in our 5-promise strategic plan. It didn't take long to discover the state of our facilities being in disrepair.
Yes.
The quality of instruction, that's a little bit more complicated. That's the 3rd promise. And there are some things that are working well and some things that aren't. And one of the things that's working well that I learned during that listening tour is pre-K. That's the reason that, as you know, we began a big campaign to put more kids into pre-K, because we were pleased with the leadership. It's Katrina McCombs, who's our head of early childhood. She's Camden High alumnus. And so a lot of different discoveries, if you will, during the listening tour on instruction. 4th, we learned a lot about the hurdles that parents face to better engage the district. and the work we need to do to get more parents involved. And one thing I saw during the listening tour, it's a big challenge,
Yes, sir.
and we need to do even more to get parents to engage. But what I learned is we put a lot of obstacles in front of them, and there are disincentives for them to engage. So for example, during the listening tour, I remember being outside of one of our schools, and this is maybe the second week of the school year, and parents were locked outside of this school at around 10 in the morning, so school's already begun, and they had basic questions about how to register their kids, and nobody was going out there to respond to them. And a security guard would come out every few minutes and yell something, and most of them were Spanish speakers, and the security guard didn't speak Spanish, and just the lack of service to families was really prevalent in that one situation. And I kept hearing more stories like that. So just trying to figure out how can we make our parents' lives easier, and then how can we do, and on top of that, what can we do to further incentivize them to get engaged with their children. And then the fifth promise was just learning that the central office itself had become a bureaucracy that was disengaged with the rest of the city. And what can we do to streamline it, to make it more efficient, to make it more responsive to the district's needs? So, those are the 5 things that stood out and came directly from the residents' mouths.
Yes. Well, you talked about preschool, and you're a father now. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
About being a father, because that's an educational experience as well.
Yeah. So my son, he's 11 months old, and he's enrolled in a Camden daycare, and I think a lot about pre-K, and just it's changed the way I think about everything we're doing, because whenever I walk into a school, I picture my son sitting in a desk, and I think about what are the questions I would now have as a parent, as opposed to the questions I would have as an administrator. But I'll give you a more specific anecdote. Early intervention being really critical, and
Correct.
We're thrilled with the leadership of Ms. McCombs, but we got a lot more work to do to ensure that kids in pre-K are prepared when they begin kindergarten. And my son at 11 months right now doesn't say many words and doesn't know his alphabet, but by the time he's 2, he should be able to know some sight words and to be able to recognize most of the letters in the alphabet.
Yes.
We have kids who are showing up in kindergarten that can't identify any sight words, that don't know 52 characters, lowercase and uppercase in the alphabet. And that's a real problem. If we can begin those interventions earlier and ensure that they're starting kindergarten in 1st grade on grade level, that completely changes their trajectory.
Okay, do you think it's important? How important do you think that reading, did you and your wife do a lot of reading while she was pregnant? Do you think that's a point of view? Because that's how I was raised. Our parents, they told my sisters and them that, and I watched them tell my nieces and nephews, well, not necessarily nephews, but to read a lot when they were pregnant, and that I guess based on the foundation of that reading starts in the womb, as some studies have shown that.
Yeah, I mean, that's critical. We did that when she was pregnant. We read with them multiple times a day. We make sure the TV's off so he sees us reading, and both my wife and I enjoy reading newspaper in the morning, books in the evening when I come home. So we want to set those expectations for him. At the same time, there's so much a school can do if a student maybe isn't getting that type of support to hopefully make up for that lack of support at home. But it begins at home. It begins at home, and we're really fortunate that we can work together, my wife and I, to set those expectations for him. Sometimes it means I can't watch PTI when I come home in Sports Center. That's a different complication. But it is important. It is important.
Yeah. Well, do you think that if you're talking about reading, and we talk still on education, there's something with education that you see in Camden? We have a lot of young parents, and Camden is a young city. And how important do you think it is for adult education, as you see a lot of people in Camden? That's one of the concerns and issues. When a lot of people knew that I was going to interview you for this show. His question, ask him about what he's going to do about adult education. Camden had a great adult education years ago. Are they going to bring that back? There's a conversation talking about that where, here there's the opportunity to confront that.
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's a big topic of conversation. I think there's more we can do. Right now, that's part of the reason we created the parent centers. It's not just a resource for them to engage with their students, but it's also a resource for them to improve upon their career skills. And we've provided resume workshops, and we've provided some adult ed opportunities so that they can become better educated and better skilled and more employable down the line themselves. And we need to focus on both of those issues. Our primary focus as a school district is, of course, the students.
Correct.
But we've got to connect those dots and make sure other city agencies are aware of this need as well. And I know our mayor is aware of this need, and it's something we've been working together on.
Correct, and I think it goes for great conversation, because in the past, it seems that, other prior superintendents, as people say, and these are some of the tweets and some of the emails that I get, that they didn't get it, that to fix education, I mean, we can throw all the money, and I know it's kind of rough sometimes for other people to say this, but I know I can say it. You can throw all the money you want to in the world at education, but if the people are not grounded at home, and I know, unfortunately or fortunately, that is not really your responsibility, but as a parent, you see that, and you see how important it is, because these children come in your home. So I think that conversation is a great conversation, and that should suffice what some of the people are talking about here in Camden. As I always see you, I saw you at the basketball game with St. Anthony's, and
right.
In prior conversation with you, I know that you are, a wonderful basketball fan and knows the sport, know the game, as we say it. And because when you talk, you have that conversation with people about basketball, you know who knows the game and who don't know the game. You know who's a fan, and I can say that you're definitely a student of the game. Although I know early in your career here in Camden, playing basketball, you kind of threw your ankle off or something. Word gets around. It's about a small town, but word gets around in the basketball thing. But talk about, your view and perspective on the outside, looking at this. Camden is a small city, but as we always say, has a big city mentality, because we're right across the river from Philadelphia. How such a city can have such great basketball and great athletes in general with a city this small amazes you. What is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I'm a big basketball fan, and skinny guys like me get thrown around on the court, and that's why I turned my ankle. It was important for me to get a good sense of the history of this city and to get involved, and not just to be a student, but to actually partake in it and to be in conversations and to be in the community. And when I quickly learned how important basketball is, that was really easy for me, because that comes pretty naturally, being a big sports fan. And I love getting into conversations like you and I have had about which is the greatest Camden High basketball team of all time, 59, 86, and so on. And it's fun, and it's also just really neat to see how much the community rallies around the current players, how much they enjoy talking about the history of the program, because it's really just a sense of community. It's not just about basketball. It's about just everyone coming together to fight for the city and to rally around the city. And the kids on the team are fantastic, and it's just a great way for me to better engage with the students. And again, it's just a lot of fun. By the way, today, 3:45 Camden Catholic.
Correct.
Big game.
Very big game. And I know when I saw you at the game, I was very impressed, because prior to that, I know when we were playing at Camden High School through my years from 82 to 86, we got excited when we looked over there and we saw Miss Cream, the principal, at the basketball game, and at the time it was Dr. Webster who was the superintendent, and it gave us a sense of pride. It gave us a sense of, we really wanted to, to show off a little bit, not because of our family and friends was present at the game, but it meant something when the educators was there to support you. Some of your teachers were there to support you, and they kind of grounded you in the class, because they were concerned about your academics. And sometimes, with our children, unfortunately in this community, a lot of children don't get the support that they get at home. So I think that speaks volumes to your leadership, that you would take the time on your busy schedule and show up at a basketball game. Now, there's obviously some great people in the city of Camden. I know one of your great friends is Councilman Arthur Barkley, as we call him, OG. Yeah. And we have great basketball conversations. He's a wonderful personality, wonderful person. I always like talking to him about those topics, about who was the best player. But in your ideas, just from statistics or maybe watching, who do you think was the best basketball player to come out of Camden?
The best basketball player?
Yes.
You, of course. Point guard on the 86 team. Greatest team ever.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Other than you?
Yes.
I mean, it's hard to argue against Wani Wagner. People talk pretty highly of Ron Smith.
Correct.
And you got Milt.
Correct, yeah.
And I think that's...
Who else is going to be a guest on the show?
Is that right?
Yeah, he gave me a commitment, and
that's great.
We won't tell you the time yet.
Yeah. Do you think I'm leaving anyone out that deserves to be in that top
No,
tier?
not at all. I think you would have to definitely start with the Wagners. I mean, as you said, DeJuan Wagner.
Yeah.
I mean, to score 100 points, I mean, I couldn't do that right now if you left me on the court by myself.
All-time New Jersey point leader.
Correct. Wonderful basketball player, and his father was great as well too. And but you know, point guards and different things. Some people say me, but I'd say Billy Culbertson was wonderful. He went on to Pitt, and he was a heck of an academic student too. He was an honor student, so that's who we kind of modeled our idea and our game after. I didn't have the talent that those guys had, and so made me pay a particular attention in the classroom a little more. Once I got to college.
You should throw Billy Thompson in that conversation.
Correct. Yeah, some
Maybe
great
Vic.
players.
Yeah, Vic belongs in there. Yeah.
Correct. And Art Still, Derek Ramsey, Darrell Lee, some great names. My brother, Jesse Mustafa Walker, Charles Payton. There's some wonderful names. And you'll see a lot of them here on this program that we're going to highlight so much of what they do. As we winding down, on this segment of the show, and I wish to get you a little longer because I love having conversation with you. Is there anything that you think that the viewers in the city of Camden that's going to be listening to this need to know when it comes particularly about education in your role?
Sure. I mean, what I would say is that it's certainly a time of change when it comes to the school district and a lot of the policies that we've been instituting. And I just want everyone to know that everything we're doing is in the best interest of children. And that's the reason I try to become accessible and visible, because I want our kids to know we're here for them. I want them to know that we're fighting for them and we're fighting for our families. And there's some complicated and tough decisions we have to make along the way. And that's the toughest part of my job, as far as making those decisions. But what I very much value is the importance of communicating the rationale for those decisions and being out there and walking families through why we're doing certain things and reminding them that ultimately what we're doing is predicated on what they've been telling us all along, as far as needing to set the bar higher for their kids and to make sure that we're there for them and being responsive to their needs.
Okay, I well appreciate it. Well, there we go. We have our first, and I think it's very an honor for me and exciting to have the superintendent of Camden City Schools here as my first guest of the Wasim Muhammad Show. I know I'm excited, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity, as we're going to have plenty of conversations when it comes to education, because education is the segue to our future. And as I always say, people know me, Camden, we have to do better. And we're going to start by having the lively art of conversation so we can raise the level of consciousness of our people and our listeners and our people in our community. And it starts with the conversation. Superintendent, thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
For the opportunity. I look forward to having more conversation with you when it comes to education.
Likewise.
And maybe even sports, especially since you said I was the best player come out. Thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Anthony Blaine, Executive Director for the Office of Safety and Security, and I'm here to offer you some tips about using our Camden City's Safe Corridor program, which are walk in groups when you can. Make sure that you are visible. Try to make sure that you can be seen in a different way. Do not take shortcuts throughout the Safe Corridor approach. No alleys, no roads. Use main thoroughfares where you can see crossing guards. And also don't be distracted, whether that's headphones, whether those are our winter masks. Make sure you can be seen and you can know where to go and to ensure a safe environment. Those are our tips for using the City Safe Corridor program, and please understand that safety is a community effort. We need us all to have a call to service. Thank you.
And we are back, and I think it's very interesting at this time that we take an outlook and have a commentary about education after we just sat down and spoke with our superintendent here, Mr. Paymon Rouhanifard. I think it's very important that we in the community begin to take an outlook of those who are in leadership that are in our community, who are doing a wonderful job, and just to get an outlook on it. So I brought in a very notable individual who's a very outstanding member of the community here in Camden. She does a wonderful job in working with our youth and working with our community organizations and being accessible in the community. The very own Sister Nurah Muhammad. Greetings, sisters. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Brother Minister.
Yes, and it's great to hear this discussion about education. You recently, pardon me, you see in the community that, with the leadership coming from our mayor, that, we're doing a wonderful job. Camden has turned around, crime is down, and, jobs are coming in. And the last leg to that stool, as you would like to say it, is education. And, education is unlike public safety, unlike, bringing in industries and companies and then jobs into the city of Camden. Tackling education is something that's a little bit difficult, to do because you don't get overnight success. It's a long, arduous kind of, progress. So what do you think about the state of Camden and its educational system and what we just heard from our superintendent, who I believe is doing a wonderful job here in the city of Camden? And what do you think about that?
Well, I would have to say I think that Camden is really on the right track. As we know that Camden has been one of the worst performing districts in the state of New Jersey, something has to change. And with Paymon Rouhanifard coming to Camden, appointed by the governor, Chris Christie, then I believe that what he has in his vision for Camden is going to move us in the right direction. Education isn't just a one-sided coin. Every student has a unique way of learning, so every school shouldn't be the same. So I think that we should see what these changes have in store for us and not look for instant gratification or the quick success that we might see with something like the public safety aspect of the city. But I think that we should just see what's going to happen, have patience, and give our students a fair chance at accepting these changes without making it too difficult for them as well.
Yeah. And what do you think that, what do you think that, some of the, you heard some of the background. I think Mr. Rouhanifard has a very interesting background, international in scope. And what do you think about his personal background? Because it's always said that not only do when you're reading the book get into the author of a book, so you can get into the person and get into their motives and reasons and why someone wrote the book, so you can get a better outlook of what you're trying to get out of when you're reading them. And every individual, to me, and every person is really their own walking book. Mm-hmm. So if you go into their background of the person's biography, relate that to what it can benefit from the children here mm-hmm. in our school district and in Camden. How can that benefit, his background benefit, our children here in Camden? Right.
Well, certainly, our children here in the city, anytime any child is being raised in an impoverished or violent environment, then the child is going to have academic challenges and emotional challenges that come along with that. And so the adversities that our children see and encounter, our superintendent is not so unsure of, because he's had his own challenges. They're not that unique to him, with him coming to America with his parents as refugees, essentially, and his parents had to acclimate to the new environment. He and his siblings had to do as well. And so he had to come to a completely new culture, a completely new country, and find his way and figure out what to do next. And so as he faced challenges on many fronts, our children have the same when they're growing up in a city that has been traumatized by violence and poverty like Camden has.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and it's interesting that you say that, because when you look at the scope of educating, particularly African American children and Latino children here in the city of Camden, sometimes we forget that, as you use the word, being traumatized with violence and poverty in the urban settings around America. Sometimes we tend to forget that with our own struggles here in Black America, and in urban centers. So I think that's very interesting that you pointed that out. If you can go a little more into that, because I do believe that you do have a background in psychology as well, too. We know that's what you majored in while you were in school. But before we go there, just tell the audience a little bit about you, why, it makes you, what makes you you, and why I'm sitting here talking to you, here on this particular Wasim Muhammad show.
Right. Well, my name is Nurah Muhammad. I'm a graduate of Rutgers Camden. And before coming to Rutgers Camden, I had familiarity with the city of Camden. Although I wasn't born and raised here, I spent a lot of time here because this is where my mom lived for many years, and I was raised down in another part of New Jersey, but I would spend my weekends here in the city. So Camden has always felt like a second home. And so after graduating from Rutgers and going on and pursuing my career, I'm happy to be back here working diligently in various aspects and programs, specifically with the youth. And I found it to be quite a passionate and rewarding work, although it can be challenging, reaching out to our youth, because there's a lot of potential in them that they don't know is there, that others aren't telling them that's there, and that they also don't know how to mine for themselves. So it's our responsibility as adults to not just lift our children up, but do it in a legitimate way so that they can see the actual value that's inside of them.
And then if you may speak to the fact that, the trauma, as I asked earlier, that sometimes to me, people overlook that in educating, children in urban settings when they're children in urban setting are prone, somewhat, unfortunately prone to violence and poverty, and how that traumatic experience sometimes can, hinder a child's learning ability, and, with so much going on. If you want to talk a little more about that.
What a lot of people might not know is that violence is not a normal or natural way of life. Violence is not something that children should encounter on a regular basis in their childhood development. And again, as Camden is a city that was plagued with poverty, when people are impoverished and there are jobs lacking, then, adults go into self-medicating. And if that's drugs or alcohol or whatever it means, if it's criminal activity. So our children are unfortunately reaping the negative aspects of what the city has to offer them. And so now that the city is on an economic swing in a positive direction, we're going to see long-term benefits. However, in the meantime, when a child is dealing with the traumas, friends who have been murdered, parents who are imprisoned, parents who are drug addicts, children who have to be the parents to their own siblings, that's a lot of weight on a child's mind. Also, are they going to have food to eat when they come home from school? Are they going to have heat in the wintertime? In these, we had a harsh winter. So our children have a lot to think about, and they have a lot weighing on them. And so when our teachers get them and expect them to sit and learn their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s, we have to recognize all the forest, the jungle that our children had to come through just to get to the classroom, to get to their desk. It's a lot.
Yes, and I recall you earlier talking about education, the various styles. As you said something as far as, to me, I look at it as the universality of education. It's very universal in scope. And, there's a lot of talk in the community around, a few of the changes that's coming in Camden about, Renaissance, public education, charter school, even, private or parochial, Talk a little more about, what's your take on, the universality of education?
Right. Well, I think it would be unfair for us to expect that all of our children would be educated or have the same learning style, because just like we are each unique, our children's learning styles are unique. So we have to have innovative and unique creative ways to reach each child. Some children are kinetic learners, some children need to touch and feel. Some children can sit and read a book. Some children learn well using audio visual technology. So we have to have the various styles to meet the needs of each child. Boys sometimes learn differently from girls, and so, and girls would have interests that are different from boys. So we have to really consider the whole child and the whole district of students, and not come with a one-size-fits-all approach, because we know that that doesn't work.
Do you think it's fair to give, or unfair to, to get in that? And I know we're not trying to get into what style, because, education to you and I is just that who can get the job done.
Right.
And, when you're educating children, you can't have you have to be able to change on your toes, because there was an old saying in education that if the child hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. So therefore we have a responsibility. And what do you say? Do you think that what some of the school districts are getting around in urban center unfair? Do you think it's unfair criticism that they have in in sitting back, and if you back in central office and you have to think of some kind of idea, some kind of plan to move forward, You know, you think it's unfair that people, because sometimes people get stuck in their old ways. And you know, this the mind of people. We talk about psychology. What do you think about that?
Well, when we go to any store as a consumer and you're looking for toothpaste, you're going to find 5 or 6 different brands, all offering their benefits and the qualities and what might work for you. And so anytime we go into a retail setting and we're offered variety, we should also be offered variety in education. And as I understand it, the schools that are going to be coming to the city are going to be public schools, open neighborhood schools for the children in that region and in that neighborhood. And I think it's fair. I think it's fair to offer a variety because life is variety. Nothing is the same. And so if we're going to have the same approach as a consumer, then parents should have the choice to educate their child in a way that they think works for them.
Correct. And I know public education worked for you and I. I think we're both products of public education. So I don't think nobody in this community is, and nobody in their right mind would be against public education, you know, because it benefits so many of us. And you're talking about public education. I forgot to tell the audience that, and you didn't mention the audience, that you are also in the Hall of Fame in basketball here in South Jersey. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's something you want to talk about in Old Delsey High School?
Well, yes, I went to Delsey Regional High School, and my senior year in 1994, we won the Group 3 state championships, and we played against Linden, which was an incredible team, and we lost in the Tournament of Champions. But something, you know, athletics can teach you a lot about life, and something that our coach told us that day, or as we were preparing to play in that Group 3 state championship team, he said, "You're not a better team than them. You're not." I mean, they had women who were touching the backboard and who had scholarships to North Carolina University. He said, "You're not better than them, but you have to be better that day." And we were better that day, and we outperformed them. And they and you talk a lot about just having the discipline and the fundamentals, and being able to have the endurance to you know, to stay the course. And so we demonstrated that, and that is a principle that we certainly must apply to life.
Absolutely, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, people don't know that about you, and you know, I know that, and I want the community to know that, because you can, as you said, you can learn so much from athletics that you can apply to your everyday life in the academic setting. You know, you talked about, as we in this discussion about education, you know, what is something that you can help parents with, you know, as a parent yourself who have children? And you know, everybody wants the best for their children. So how can you? What can we say to parents when it comes to the role that parents must play in educating, in the educational process of our children?
A few things I would say. One is we must take an interest in the education, in the schoolwork. We must take an interest in the school, and that will help our children model that interest. They have to see us interested, and they have to see us engaged. We shouldn't just go to the school when there was a fight or when we found out someone brought a knife. We should constantly be demonstrating our interest in the school. We should also teach our children knowledge of self-knowledge. Our children are often going to school thinking that they're going to learn about the greatness and success of other people. Even in our educational courses that we have in the public schools, a lot of history isn't necessarily specific to them. And so our children are learning history of other people, and they have to learn, let's talk about the history of the family. Let's talk about that wonderful thing that, you know, grandfather did in 1982. And so as our children see greatness just within their own bloodline and their own biological families, let alone their own community or their ethnic group or their racial class, they see they can gain confidence in themselves because they see that they come from a seed of greatness. And so our children often are just mirroring what they see in terms of the accomplishments of others. And so our children often esteem others and don't esteem themselves, and that's demonstrated in not just how they treat themselves, but how they treat their peers.
Then do you think that that role is a role on education or the teacher, or you think more of that role, or you're talking about that role should be more of the parent, that you're inspiring that parent, because even if they don't do that for your child, the teacher, you still have a responsibility as a parent, as a mother, because as we know, the first teacher is mother.
That's right.
You know,
and
right.
And you know, when you teach a male, you teach an individual. When you teach a woman, you're teaching a nation, because we give birth to the nation, and our primary responsibility is our families. And so it is important that schools teach our children and give them a broad knowledge in terms of history. However, if the school doesn't do it, if the teacher isn't equipped or doesn't have the capacity, we know that our children still need to have self-knowledge. So we need to know it ourselves and also impart that into our children. For a while my children were in public school, you know, when certain holidays came up, if it was King, if it was Christmas, I would give them information because I wanted them prepared that day so that whatever they heard from the teacher, it was either confirmed or
denied.
Confirmed or denied. And so what
like
I
that.
saw was that when the teachers would instruct the class, you know, based on the cultural celebration or the historical figure, my sons were answering questions that their students had, that their peers had in the classroom, their classmates, that the teachers didn't know the answer to.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And what do you say about if a parent, you know, so many of the challenges that our parents have here in Camden, unfortunately, with some of them, you know, being on the second grade reading level themselves or can't read themselves. What do you say for those parents? And what do you say? Are you asking or saying to those parents that they should seek outreach, you know, or what should they do?
Right. Well, you know, certainly I understand that there can be a little shame with a parent not being able to help their child with homework, and there's wonderful resources here in the city of Camden that can help with literacy. And what a wonderful thing it would be for parent and child to be learning together. That the child sees the parent that might have a second or third grade reading level or might have difficulty with numbers. If the student or the child sees their parent learning and benefiting from learning, then that is definitely going to, you know, improve the child's interest in school. And so sometimes, especially with us having very, very young parents here in the city that may or may not have completed school or may not have gotten the functional skills that they need from schools, sometimes parents don't help their young people with homework or with schoolwork, and there might be some defensiveness, and the child might feel that the parent is disinterested, and it might come across that way when it's really the parent's fear or insecurity in the ability to help with homework. So parents can certainly ask the teachers of the schools or you know, go down to City Hall or look into the various programs that the city has to offer, the parent centers now that the district has, so that they can get the support that they need, because we all have challenges. And you know, if it's alcoholic, you say, you know, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. We just admit to the challenges that we have, and then we just take the steps to improve and work on those. And I think that'd be wonderful that our children would see us learning right alongside with them.
I guess you would call it stepping up to the plate and taking a swing.
Right.
You know, you have to do something. You can't do nothing, or you can't do like the ostrich do. The ostrich put his head down on the hole and make no movement. You know, so you suggested that we do that. Nutrition. How important do you think nutrition is to the process of educating our children? You know,
You're right. Nutrition is very important. It's the fuel that the body needs to complete a given task. And you know, our children have these salty, sweet taste buds. That's what they desire. And so it's, you know, it can be challenging to change the habit or the appetite. However, we must encourage our children to eat more fruits and vegetables, more wholesome foods, and then teach them why. You know, we teach our children at our private school that we have, we teach them about reading labels and about what certain labels mean and about how certain food ingredients that are permitted in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration are banned and are illegal in other countries, and there's a reason for that. So not just telling our children, you know, you can't have these potato chips or you can't have that candy, but explain to them why, and explain to them why their body needs certain types of fuel and certain types of nutrients, minerals, and vitamins so that they can perform. And I've found that when we explain it to our children, then they want to do better when they know better. They're still going to be children, but they'll have the information.
Absolutely, because you ask them what they want for dinner, they're going to say pizza.
Pizza and fries.
Pizza and French fries, you know, we have to tell them that. I think it's a wonderful conversation. I think we're on our first segment, and we're going to come back in a minute and talk a little bit about, Mr. Paymon Rouhanifard and some of the things that he discussed about education and, you know, moving Camden forward and, about teamwork. We talked about athletics. We talk about, you know, playing basketball, team sports, and why it's necessary that if we, you know, even if we disagree, we can be disagreeable, but not agree with, you know, policymakers and different things, but we still have a role and responsibility to work in collusion with everyone, as all the animals in the jungle all work and live together with with each other, but they keep going on. And I think if we're greater or better, and we're supposed to be better and greater, the greatest of creation, then I think we should act and do better. Don't you think so?
I absolutely agree.
So when we come back, we're going to have that discussion, and we're going to talk a little more about education. And you know, I just want you to sit back and just hear some things and just get commentary on what the community and people in the community think about education. We'll be right back.
Chances are, someone you love will one day be affected by some kind of vision problem. Save your vision for the years ahead. Call 1-800-437-2423 or log on to seeabettertomorrow.org to learn about glaucoma and macular degeneration.
We're back, and we're sitting here with Sister Nurah Muhammad, community-oriented sister who's doing a wonderful work here in the city of Camden and working with our youth and families and just caring and being a part of the community. We're sitting here talking about education, having a little commentary about, you know, the status of Camden City School District and from the advantage of the community. And we just heard in the first part of this Wasim Muhammad show from our superintendent, who I was so very honored to interview and talk about education and talk about his life and different things. And you know, what comes to mind, Sister Nurah, with me is the fact that you know, when you see in America, you know, when you go into Washington, D.C., and you see in our politics, whether it's in Trenton, whether it's in Washington, D.C., or any other nation for that fact, that you see legislators and elected officials, you know, arguing over bills, arguing over policies, arguing over what is the best, you know, way to move the country forward or the state forward or the city forward and different things. But yet, when they come to a conclusion on a vote or on a decision that they make, you see everybody put down their ammunition, you know, put down their weapons, and they go to work and try to make that vision of whatever law that they pass, whatever ideas that they said that they were going to fight for. And you see them start working together in collusion with them. Education is such a challenging factor here in the city of Camden. What do you say about the bickering and, you know, the disunity, not only that you see in our community, but even when it comes to education? Because if we're confused and fighting and arguing all the time, although we always don't agree, we're never going to agree. Everybody's never going to agree on everything from everybody. But what is your outlook on that from the community and looking at our community, that when we disagree, you know, some of the things that is encouraging or discouraging to you and I?
Well, the first thing, we have to be concerned with the children. And so as adults, we should know if it's a husband and wife in a home, if you do have to have an argument and a disagreement, then you close the bedroom door. And you do so it doesn't disrupt the child. Because when a child hears adults arguing, then it's kind of natural that their stomachs clench, their anxiety increases. And so there's a physiological and a mental effect on a child when there's adults arguing. So the first thing is protection of the children. And then secondly, I would say that when we do disagree and we do argue the idea. You know, the attack is not on the person. The argument is with their idea, it's with their philosophy or their proposal. But we can still respect the person that we have a disagreement with. And like you said, we see that all over the world. And sometimes when it comes to hot button topics like education, and we can kind of do some below the belt type of things. And I think that's unfortunate because, again, as our children are watching us as adults, they should see role models. They should see civil disagreements. And, you know, unfortunately, our children are seeing us, you know, acting uncivil in many forums. And I think that we can certainly disagree and debate ideas, but do so in a civil way so that both parties maintain their dignity and respect.
I think so. And I just wanted to clear something up since we're discussing that. You know, our superintendent had to make some very tough choices last school year with with some of the budget issues. And I stated, and I came right in on the advisory board at that time, right in the real hot topic of that situation. And then I think at Camden High School, some of the students were, would exercising their rights, and I think that was wonderful. But I think what some people in the community, sometimes stories can always get distorted. But I'm glad I have the opportunity to, tell my story and to get it right. And I think what people misunderstood what I was trying to say to the community at the advent of me coming on these local advisory board here in Camden. I was saying that it was a great opportunity to tell our young people something that they're going to take with themselves for the rest of their lives about budgeting, having the ability to work with a budget, let alone before you even get to work or run a major corporation or a major school district like Mr. Rouhanifard is running here in Camden, but just the average budget in your home, be able to budget your bills at home and pay that right. I, as an educator, and I've been an educator for years, and being an educator never stops because you have children, you have community, you have we have a civic responsibility to teach and train people. But nevertheless, when I always use, whether it's a misfortunate or unfortunate part of me, circumstances, I always take that opportunity to use that opportunity to talk to young people, whether it's good or bad, negative or positive, to see what it is that we can get out of that situation and how we can move forward and what we can learn from it. So I think that's what was misunderstood. I said it was a wonderful opportunity to say, listen, we have to focus on budget. We have a fiscal responsibility as adults, and sometimes things just get heavy, and sometimes we have to make decisions that we don't want to make, but we have to make those decisions when we are budgeting our budgetary lives.
Well, that's important because we can't be delusional. We have to accept that there's a bottom line. And for us to continue operating in a way that doesn't equal out to the bottom line, then something's going to be off. There's going to be a significant deficit somewhere. So that's just an important tool, that's an important aspect that our children must learn. And that was an important teaching opportunity, that they understand that there has to be a budget and they have to learn that, life is about tough choices, hard choices. And so I'm glad that you said that. I was there at that advisory board meeting, and I thought that was important, that message we take back to the children, that let's be for real, that there's a budget, and for us to operate as if our budget adds up and it doesn't, that's delusion.
Correct, regardless of what we said, what happened
how
yesterday, or how we feel, what happened yesterday or last week or last month. We always live in the past sometimes, but we got to move forward, and that's why we like that acronym. Well, it seems like time always runs, whenever you and I get together, we talk topics that I feel is important to you and I and important to our community. Time just moves so fast. So, Sister Nurah, it's always a pleasure to have you here. And I thank you for being here, being a guest on the Wasim Muhammad Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, there it is. You have it. We are winding down on this segment of the Wasim Muhammad Show. And on behalf of our superintendent, Mr. Paymon Rouhanifard, I thank him, and our guest here, Sister Nurah Muhammad. We thank her for definitely being here. But on behalf of the mayor of the city of Camden, Mayor Dana L. Red, and her staff, particularly Ms. Novella Starks-Henson, and the Advisory Board of Education, I thank you for welcoming. I'll see you again next week. Thank you.